Hey everyone, and welcome to another Konoha Reviews, where we review games both new and old on all platforms. If you like the content that I make, then please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you'll never miss a review when it comes out. Today we talk about the game Yakuza 0, the worldwide hit and best-selling entry in the entire Yakuza series. I have a very interesting history with the Yakuza franchise. I remember seeing the original Yakuza back for the PlayStation 2 in stores a lot, but never was interested until I had visited Tokyo back in 2006 for the first time. After having then been to Japan multiple times and hearing that Yakuza was sort of a Japanese GTA type game, I wanted to give it a shot. By that time, the game was really reduced in price, so I picked up a copy for $10 or so and played the first Yakuza all the way through and absolutely loved it because of its depiction of Tokyo. Anyone who has been to Tokyo and has played any of the Yakuza games knows what I'm talking about, but just everything in terms of the look and the feel of the game is correct with how it is in Japan itself. Small details like how the konbini shops look, to the green payphones on the corners of the street, the people handing out tissues on the street, or the restaurants with the menu vending machines. It's something you might not realize when playing a game, but the details like this can really make a convincing world to the point where you recognize it when you actually been there, or recognize it from the game if you visit the real place afterward. I had the last experience, for example, with New York after playing GTA 4. I recognized so much of the details from the game, like the individual stairs in front of the doors in areas like Queens, the hot dog stands, or the several other points of interest I had seen first in the game. Yakuza does this perfectly with Tokyo, or more specifically, Kabukicho, which is the red light district in Shinjuku. What also helps is that the game actually has real branding in it, to the point where all sorts of drinks, food, and other real brands are in the game. And normally, I would roll my eyes at them, much like I did with the cup noodles being in Final Fantasy 15 or Monster Energy being in Death Stranding. It feels weird there. But since this game is trying to depict Tokyo, it actually felt more convincing because of the branding used. If you head into a shop, you can look at some magazines, and they are actual magazine brands that they sell there. Drinks like Boss Coffee, CC Lemon, or various cup ramen you can buy are actually the ones you can buy in Tokyo. It's really cool and adds such cool details to immerse yourself more into that setting of Tokyo, Japan. Later on, as more Yakuza games came out, even more brands were added, including restaurants or hotel branches. So the first Yakuza I really loved, and thought it was such a unique game and experience. I then also played Yakuza 2, which was on the PlayStation 2 as well, and also loved that even though it was more of the same. Finally, then the PlayStation 3 came along, and I remember buying the game Yakuza Kenzan, or Ryu ga Gotoku Kenzan as it's known in Japan, which was a Yakuza game during the samurai period. That game was never released in the West, and at that time I still did not speak any Japanese, so it was a bit difficult to get through it, but with guides I somehow managed. I then, after a few years, picked up Yakuza 3 and really loved that game as well because the graphics were just so beautiful and the continuation of the story was fantastic. I bought the Japanese version first because that came out a year or so, maybe before the version was released in the West, that was apparently missing some minor content. Then finally I moved to Tokyo and lived there for the next 8 years. But ironically, by then, my interest in the Yakuza series slowed down a bit. I believed it was because of how many Yakuza games were coming out afterward. A Yakuza game came out about zombies, then Yakuza 4 came out, then another Samurai Yakuza, then Yakuza 5, then a Fist of the North Star Yakuza style game, then Yakuza 0, then remakes of Yakuza 1 and 2, and then Yakuza 6, etc, etc. It was just all a bit much, and it seemed like each year a new Yakuza game was released, and it honestly felt a bit like the franchise had become like Final Fantasy or Dynasty Warriors with 15 entries or something. Now with the pandemic, I am back in Holland and a good friend of mine actually borrowed me the remakes of the first and the second Yakuza game. So I felt ready to delve into this world once more, but this time I wanted to start all the way at the beginning, and so I decided to first get Yakuza 0 and start my journey there. As I said, Yakuza 0 was a huge hit for the franchise, to the point where I think it really surprised the creators of the game. No other Yakuza entry has sold nearly as many copies as Yakuza 0, and in a way, it was the perfect way to do so because it's a prequel to Yakuza 1. meaning that anyone can pick it up and play without knowing anything about the earlier games. For many, Yakuza 0 is also their favorite in the franchise, but I was of the opinion that this was because it might have been their first Yakuza game ever, and thus the feeling is the freshest and the best. But after playing Yakuza 0 now for myself, I might have to change that stance, and maybe, just maybe, Yakuza 0 might also turn out to be my favorite of the ones I played thus far. Let's take a look at what Yakuza 0 is all about. As mentioned before, some people label Yakuza as the Japanese GTA, but I think one should not make that statement since the Yakuza world is far smaller and more limited compared to the ones in GTA. What I think is a better comparison is that the Yakuza game is an evolution of the Shenmue games, where you can have various open areas you can explore, do quests, and also battle enemies in a brawler beat-em-up style. Along the way, you collect money, which you can use to upgrade skills or perks to make your character stronger. The story revolves around two characters that play major roles in the rest of the game series. First and foremost, there's Kiryu Kazuma, the main protagonist in the entire Yakuza franchise. In Yakuza 0, you see him as a 20-year-old rookie in a Yakuza family who resigns after a number of incidents occur concerning a murder at an area called the Empty Lot, which is apparently worth a lot of money. Kiryu gets framed for the murder and has to lay low, but also meets a ton of different and interesting characters who shed more light on this mysterious empty lot and that they have to find the person who owns the right to that space. Story and characters has always been a strength of the Yakuza series, and Yakuza 0 is no different. Pretty much all characters you meet are unique and very interesting. It's a bit much maybe with the macho alpha type male characters, but truth be told, that is how Yakuza types are shown in Japanese pop culture and movies and series. I did find it weird though how some of those whiny social justice warriors find problems with what they call toxic masculinity in some games, but let this one slip because it's pretty much an all-male show and the women that do come across usually don't play important roles or are very helpless. It's just weird to me how some of those SJWs seem a bit selective with their judgment. But anyway, I for one really love the story, as all the characters are so well thought out. Everyone has their own unique personality, look, and own agenda. Some want to rise to the top through raw power, others want to bribe the one who owns the empty lot, and then another will seize power over the backs of his own comrades. Each character is more fascinating than the previous one, and in terms of game storytelling, Yakuza 0, but also the Yakuza series in general, is just one of the best. I will say though, that one critique point I have with Yakuza 0 is that there is real inconsistency when it comes to the cutscenes and the story delivery. Some of the cutscenes are beautifully rendered and excellent. They are often lengthy, but I don't mind this since they are just acted out so well. It's ironic because most of the time these cutscenes are just two or more men talking to one another, yet it is so captivating and interesting that you are glued to the screen. The story can actually become pretty dark and is not afraid of killing characters in pretty horrible or sudden ways. So those cutscenes are great. But then there are more in-game cutscenes where the characters just stand still, almost A-posing, and their dialogue is voice acted. Then there's also cutscenes where there's no audible dialogue and you simply are reading text. And then there are also the weird still images, where it's almost like a painting with minimal movement where the dialogue is audible. Some of these lesser produced quality cutscenes are pretty weak and don't convey that same drama or suspense that the better produced cutscenes do, and the inconsistency definitely is distracting and noticeable. But then besides Kiryu Kazuma, you also have a second character you follow in the form of Majima Goro. This character is an absolute nutcase in the first games that were released, even willing to kill some of his own gang members with an umbrella just because they misread another Yakuza for a different person. A nice detail that I never knew about until recently is that in the original PlayStation 2 version that had English voiceover, Majima Goro was voiced by Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker himself. Anyway, in Yakuza 0, you follow his story as he is exiled by his Yakuza gang and being held against his will in the city of Osaka. Through his story, you will find out how he basically snapped and became the Majima you know from the other games, as he meets with interesting characters yet again, like a blind girl or the tried member who's trying to protect her. One thing I actually did not expect is how involved I would get with Majima's storyline. Majima soon became a fan favorite after the first few Yakuza games, but I did not really like him in the original as I thought he was just a bloodlusting psychopath. In Yakuza 2, they try a little bit too hard to make him all quirky and funny, and so initially I wasn't really looking forward to be playing as him. But I actually really fell in love with his storyline, and he was so charming and likable since he felt vulnerable and hurt after failing and being ousted from the Yakuza. He literally was like a caged dog, and that vulnerability made him very likable. It also helped that he had some very cool fighting styles, but overall, I just really like playing as Majima, much more than I initially thought I would. You switch characters every 2 chapters or so, and will have to walk to various locations to do the main quest and along the way beat up enemies. Sometimes the battles consist of single battles in between cutscenes, but there are also multiple times where you need to run through a larger location like an office building or a Japanese garden and take out multiple groups of enemies along the way. The fighting itself is not really all that special, but does play very nicely. It's super simple, but therefore easy to pick up. You can punch, kick, grab, block, etc., and all the movements are fluid and quick. You can switch to different fighting styles, which consists of the archetypes like quick but weak punches, or strong but slow punches. However, Majima has some more unique movesets, including one that always uses a baseball bat, or one where he turns into a breakdancer. Besides just combos, you can also perform finishing moves that show a short little cutscene when a yellow gauge is full after racking up some combos. And these finishing moves have always been a highlight of the fights in the Yakuza, ever since the first entry. They are always very visceral, brutal, and bloody, and they rarely get boring. The cool thing is that the finishing moves are context sensitive, meaning that if you perform one near a wall, you will punch or stomp the enemy against that wall. However, are you next to a fence, then your character will kick the enemy against that fence and curb stomp him next. Or, if you are next to a river, you can throw the enemy in the river with a finishing move, or if you have an item in your hand, ranging from a weapon to a garbage can or anything you can pick up around you, the finishing move will use that item. It's really awesome because when you see a new item or weapon you've never used before, you immediately want to see what its finishing move is. And as I said, some are incredibly brutal, to the point where the enemy would pretty much die, even though the game clearly states that Kiryu has never killed someone. Usually at the end of each level you will have to defeat a boss who's stronger and has a lot more HP than the regular thugs you faced before. You can still use finishers on these enemies, which is appreciated, and the difficulty in the game is also quite good, because it never gets too difficult, but it's also no easy cakewalk. You will have to get some healing items with you when you're going down one of these longer sections where you run around and face enemies, since you will get hurt or caught in a combo. So the fighting mechanics in the game are solid and fun, but nothing too special or unique. Then what about the graphics? Well, stylistically, I think the game looks great, but technically, the game is actually quite ugly. The engine that Yakuza 0 is built on is the same that was used for Yakuza Kenzan and Yakuza 3, meaning it's an engine that was built more than 12 years ago. I remember when Yakuza 3 came out that I thought it looked absolutely stunning with beautiful created character models and environments. But time is a cruel mistress, and though those graphics are fine for the PlayStation 3 generation, for the PlayStation 4 generation, it's not so nice. The pre-rendered cutscenes still look amazing, with great facial expressions and detail, but it's mostly the environment and pedestrians that outright look ugly and lack detail. For the main quest, you sometimes need to talk to some homeless people, and the texture on their clothing is almost of PlayStation 2 level, blocky, blurry, lacking detail. Same can be said for things like signs or vending machines that have very blurry textures, and by that time, many games had already surpassed it when it comes to graphical fidelity. But as I said, though I think it's ugly on a technical level, I think it's very beautiful on a stylish level, as the Tokyo is just so beautifully presented with neon lights, billboards everywhere, and characters doing things from talking on the phone to practicing their golf swing in front of a store. Everywhere you look, there's something to see, and the Japanese look so well portrayed and atmospheric that it outshines the technical lack of it until you get up close and personal with characters where you can clearly notice it. I know that games nowadays are still running on that engine, so I'm a little bit scared with how I would react to the graphics there. But for now, Yakuza 0 is like a beautiful Fabergé egg that looks gorgeous from afar, but actually has a lot of ugly cracks when you get up close and study it. So the main story of the game is fantastic. The characters are all very interesting, the fighting isn't special but very fun and accessible, and the graphics aren't very good, but the unique atmosphere of the game saves it. And yet, there are still two aspects that I have not talked about that for most Yakuza players are very important, if not the most important part of the Yakuza experience, and those are the side quests and the minigames. Ever since the first Yakuza game, you could do a few minigames including karaoke, bowling, baseball, or gamble at a casino. These minigames were often simple but pretty fleshed out, as the karaoke was basically a rhythm-type button push game, and the gambling in the casino offered different games that were more than just doing the same thing over and over again. And so with each Yakuza game, they added more and more minigames, and since it was on the same engine, they could kinda import and alter earlier put in minigames to make each Yakuza game more and more chock full of those minigames you could play. Enter Yakuza 0, and by that time, they had added a ton of minigames to the earlier Yakuza games, and so this one is full of them too. One has to realize that I stopped playing the Yakuza games after 3. That game feels simply anorexic compared to how full Yakuza 0 is with all the different minigames you can do. And I say minigames, but many of these are very deep and developed and are of a quality that you could literally sell them as standalone games on Steam for maybe $5 or $10. I'm not kidding that there are games on sale on Steam for those prices that have less content or are less deep than some of those minigames that you get in this one game. And there's so much to do. You can do karaoke, bowling, baseball, mini go-karts, mahjong, shogi, which is like Japanese chess, various Chinese gamble games. You can go fishing, play poker, blackjack, or roulette at the casino. You can play darts or billiards, do a weird shooting minigame revolving around a phone dating line. You can play 4 different arcade games that are fully in the game like Outrun. You can manage a hostess club, manage real estate, place bets on catfights with girls in skimpy bikinis, and then I'm probably still even forgetting some other minigames I haven't mentioned yet. And as I said, these minigames go really deep. The billiards game you can do multiple styles, including 8-ball, 9-ball, and other balls, and either play solo or against an opponent or even another player. Or what about darts? Also various modes you can play in, and even different darts to collect that each have a different stat. The bowling has different weight of bowling balls, and you can add spin to do trick shots, etc. It just is really amazing that these minigames have so much depth to them. They could have easily gone the round of just putting in one game mode for each, and thus you would have the same experience over and over again if you play it. But there's quite a good variety in there. And I call them mini, but multiple of these games you can sink hours and hours into. The Pocket Circuits carts, I briefly mentioned, are these little go-karts on a small racetrack which you control with remote controls. You don't actually have control over them, but instead get to assemble the cart with different parts that add things like speed, weight, stability, etc. And then during the race, you can choose when to use or boost, or need to mash a button to avoid falling off the track. There are hundreds of parts to buy and upgrade just for this minigame alone. There are like 7 or 8 different tracks you can unlock, and each comes with a unique side quest where you need to defeat a certain character in a duel. You then also can unlock a mode where you can create your own tracks, and I just was absolutely blown away by how much there was to just this one flimsy minigame, and I loved it. I spent so much time buying new items and parts for my cart to make it faster or heavier in case I flew off the track too much. Try out different carts or save up money to buy even better parts. In the end, I spent more than 4 hours on completing every single race and beating every single opponent in that questline that comes with this minigame. And the fact that I spent 4 hours on just a minigame alone in a much bigger game was mind-blowing to me. There are games out there, fully $60 games, that take less time than this one minigame did for me. Now granted, not all other minigames have this many quests or depth associated with it, but other minigames like the Managing or the Hostess Club can go super deep and will take a long time, where you need to keep an eye out on your staff, can adjust their looks to suit the customer's needs, and during the actual openings of the club, it's almost like a rhythm puzzle game, where you need to pair customers with staff who have the correct traits and experience. Same goes for the real estate, which is a lot simpler, but still can go quite deep with you having to travel through town and buy properties, then upgrade them with cash, and also enlist various staff to manage and secure these areas. Through the side quests, you will unlock more staff options, and some staff members are, for example, better in upgrading restaurants or shops, and others are better for upgrading electronic stores or sex shops. Again, a surprising amount of depth for such a small side activity, and with multiple neighborhoods to conquer, it's another minigame that can take several hours to complete. So yeah, the minigames are plentiful, deep, and amazing. What about those side quests that I then spoke of? Well, ever since the first Yakuza games, there were side quests to do involving random NPCs you come across on the streets. Usually, they were your typical fetch quest, or your typical go here and fight someone to complete it type quest. In the original Yakuza, those quests were sometimes a bit funny, but not too much out there. Then, ever since Yakuza 2, I remember there was a side quest involving you heading into a building where some adult salaryman was dressed as a baby involving baby roleplay or something, and pretty much since then, the quests have become weirder and weirder. But many of the people actually really like this weirdness, which is why I think they became like that. In Yakuza 0, there are more than 100 side quests to do. They start out simple, with for example a child getting a game he just bought stolen, and you have to walk around the city to find who stole it and give it back. It's again very much a fetch type quest, as you walk around, talk to someone, and beat him up. And then he says that the game was stolen by yet another guy, and so you run through the city again to find another person to beat up. After which he also tells you it was stolen, etc, etc. So in the end, the quest itself actually is very fetch-like, and not special in the slightest, except that Yakuza for some reason gets away by being so weirdly charming with its stories of these quests. The final guy who stole the game that the kid bought ends up being the kid's father, and he wanted to steal it so that he could give it to his son. The two reunite, and the father promises the child not to do this anymore as they walk away hand in hand. Super cheesy, but for some reason, so charming in this game. I would have rolled my eyes at it in many other games, and I don't know why this game gets away with it, but it does. The same can be said for Police Officer, who isn't good in anything, and so he gets demoted to just do pat and searches on the streets. After doing this multiple times, you end up doing a battle with some thugs to protect a lady, and that gives him the courage to be more productive. Or a pervy guy, who frequents an adult video store, is secretly in love with a girl who looks like one of his favorite porn stars. He sends you to talk to her, and through a few coincidences, the guy confesses his love for the girl. You then get harassed and beat up the thug, after which the girl rejects the pervy guy because she desperately fell in love with you, after seeing you beat up that thug. It's not done in a sad way, but in a very comical and almost cartoony way, as Kiryu always gets himself into trouble, and it's extremely awkward, but sometimes also very funny. There's another one where you need to help a failing dominatrix in being dominant, and so you need to talk to her and give advice on what dominant things she should say to her customers. And so you go to a public park where children are also playing, and they actually come up to you as the dominatrix is berating you. Pretty sure you could not make such a scene or side quest in the West with how sensitive everyone is, but the Japanese just don't give a crap and knows it's all tongue-in-cheek. They know it's ridiculous and weird and meant to be funny, and that is what it succeeds in. I do think that, through time, more and more of the side quests have become a bit more sexual though, with the game also frequenting Japanese adult actresses in it that sometimes play a role in the side quests, and after completing those, you can then watch a short clip of the actual adult actress at the adult video store. And these videos are very weird and awkward. Now don't get me wrong, I don't mind my pervy things in video games. I mean, I bought the game Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball back when it came out, not for the volleyball I can tell you. But here, it just feels very weird and awkward where the clips are just the girl smiling at the camera as it zooms in on their chest and butt, while they play with something like a big balloon or blow bubbles at the camera. Now, having lived longer in Japan, I know that a lot of Japanese men do find this very attractive and nice to look at. But for us Westerners, it's just so tame and a bit weird. Many of us would probably think, well, it will be less time wasting to just watch actual porn from these porn actresses than these weird balloon rubbing videos. However, even with these weird videos, the game still got a huge laugh out of me too, since once more it knows that it's being ridiculous and weird, as when the video finally stops, you get a close-up of some tissues and your character's going, "Phew!" meaning he was finally done doing his business. But again, it's what the Japanese audience likes, I guess. And I do think it's one of those games' strength is that it's not necessarily made for the Western audience, but instead for the Japanese one. I remember that back when the director of this franchise actually felt nothing for sending the game to the West since they might not get it, but by now he has definitely been turned over, probably by those dollar signs. You can then also find cards with the pictures of these adult stars all throughout the city, which are also used in some of the side quests. There are also some interesting Easter eggs and nods to fans of the Yakuza series, with for example a blonde-haired guy making a short cameo in some side quests who will play a major role in Yakuza 2. But I will say that because many of these side quests have a sexual tone or very quirky tone, it is a stark contrast with the main quest line, which is all dark and gloomy. One moment, you see a Yakuza boss brutally killing a woman for no reason, and next, you are helping a young kid on getting his girlfriend back who is selling her underwear to pervy old men. And because there are so many side quests out there, you can get that thing that I hate in so many open world games, where you can lose track of what the main story was about again because you're just been so occupied with doing side stuff. You know, that moment when you finally return to follow the main quest, and then you think to yourself, what was the last thing that happened again? Because of that, I would suggest to do maybe 5 to 6 side quests per chapter and then move on with the main story, as that will give you a good amount of varied things to do, but never lose track of the main quest, and then by the final chapter you will have done a lot of quests, so you only need to complete a couple of dozen more to complete it. While playing it, I actually thought to myself that it might even work better for some if all these minigames and side quests was just a separate game or game mode, since its tone and story is so drastically different from the main story. And when you complete the game, that's kind of what you get, where you just unlock the world where you can walk around and just do the side quests and minigames. So you could also first just follow the main story, and then when the story is completed, go around town and follow all the side stories and minigames. The game is also incredibly long. The first Yakuza had some side stuff to do, but you could easily beat it in 12 to 15 hours. With Yakuza 0, I have close to 60 hours into it, and I still have not done everything. I still have around 20 or so side quests to complete, there's still one district I have not yet completed in the real estate, and Hostess Club minigame. There are still cars to collect, tournaments at the Coliseum to partake in, and I'm not kidding in that if you are a completionist type of player, this game easily can get you 80 to 100 hours of gameplay. We are talking about Witcher 3 type of numbers here. I have completed the main story of Yakuza 0 though, and am close to finishing Yakuza Kiwami, the remake of Yakuza 1, and I can already tell you that Yakuza Kiwami is indeed far smaller than this game, though still pretty big compared to other games. So in terms of length, this game has got your back. I saw it on the Steam sale for $5, and to pay $5 for 80 hours of gameplay is an absolute steal. Before we get to the rating, I do want to mention one more critique point though, and those are the random fights that occur every 30 seconds or so when you're walking around. I guess it's the game's equivalent of a random battle, but you have these random thugs that come and chase you have to do battle with if they catch you. There's various ways you can avoid this by, for example, throwing money in the air, or distract them by wearing shoes that lessen their appearance, but it takes some time to get these items or abilities, and it's just absolutely obnoxious to keep running into these guys over and over and over again. The fights themselves are not difficult at all, and are over quite quickly, but they occur way too often, which makes it feel repetitive and stale. I also have one little pet peeve that irritated me so much at the end, and I will give a bit of a spoiler for the ending, so if you still have not completed the game, please come back when you do. But what was so incredibly annoying to me was the final cutscene where the girl, who was initially blind, has her sight back and runs into Majima on the street. Majima never told her his name, and thus it is implied she does not know that this person is the one that helped her back in Osaka. Majima's relationship with the girl is so sweet as they really bond in Osaka, and it's cute when he helps her out in Tokyo when she is being harassed by some fellow Yakuza of Majima's gang. Even in the post-credit scene, she heads to the empty lot and thanks everyone who helped her, though she wished that she knew what the person was called who helped her in Osaka so she could thank him properly. She then finds out that Majima left something very precious there for her to find, and she starts to cry and thanks him again, even though she does not know who he is. And I get that maybe the creators wanted to put a message in there that you should be kind or helpful to others, even if they won't or cannot give you gratitude back, but I would have loved at least one sort of thank you or nod towards Majima from her. Maybe a thank you for helping me as Majima disappears around the corner after she realizes it was this man that helped her back in Osaka. Because, and this is what my whole pet peeve and annoyance is based on, even though she does not know his name, she does know that he has only one eye. The fact that she does not put two and two together, and that this guy who only has one eye was the guy with the one eye who helps her back in Osaka, drives me nuts. How dumb can you be? Anyway, I just needed to get that off my chest, and was something very, very small that I was very much annoyed about. Again, I acknowledge that it's only a pet peeve, and a very small detail, so this annoyance will not lower the score in any way, but I just wish it was written a bit better, since the one eye thing is just too much on the nose for the girl not to notice, in my opinion. Now, we have finally come to the conclusion, and as I said, the game has an amazing story, great characters, likable fighting mechanics, great and a lot of minigames, lots of side quests that are very charming and unique, and the amount of content make it to where you can easily put more than 50 hours into the game. Minor points are the dated graphics, the inconsistency with the cutscenes, and the constant battles you have to do on the streets. And so in the end, Yakuza 0 gets an 8.7. It's close to a 9, but just needs more polish with its graphics, or be more up to date with some of the cutscenes, delivery, etc. I am very curious on how my review for Yakuza Kiwami will be. It was of course the very first Yakuza story I played, so it will always have a very special place for me personally, but as I mentioned too, all the Yakuza games are very similar to one another, so I'm curious if fatigue will set in, as it might become repetitive, or if the game can keep things fresh and keep me entertained for many more hours to come.